Thank you, Prabhu. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 4, Text 22. Yatra Narayano Devo Narascha Bhagavan Rishihi Mridduti Vram Tapo Dirgham Te Pate Loka Bhavanao Yatra Narayano Devo Narascha Bhagavan Rishihi Mridduti Vram Tapo Dirgham Te Pate Loka Bhavanao Yatra Narayano Devo Narascha Bhagavan Rishihi Mridduti Vram Tapo Dirgham Te Pate Loka Bhavanao. Then, should I still do the word for it? Yeah. Yatra, where Narayana, the personality of Godhead, Deva, by incarnation, Naraha, human being, Cha, also, Bhagavan, the Lord, Rishihi, great sage, Mriddu, amiable to everyone, Tivram, severe, Tapaha, penance, Dirgham, very long, Te Pate, performing, Loka Bhavanal, welfare of all living entities. Translation. There in Badarik Ashram, the personality of Godhead, in his incarnation as the sages Nara and Narayan, has been undergoing great penance since time immemorial for the welfare of all amiable living entities. Badarik Ashram in the Himalayas, the abode of the Nara Narayan sages, is a great place of pilgrimage for the Hindus. Even up to the present, hundreds and thousands of pious Hindus go to pay respect to the incarnation of Godhead Nara Narayan. It appears that even 5,000 years ago, this holy place was being visited by such a holy being as Uddhav, and even at that time, the place was known to be very, very old. This particular pilgrimage site is very difficult to visit for ordinary men because of its difficult situation in the Himalayas, in a place which is covered by ice almost all year. A few months during the summer season, people can visit this place at great personal inconvenience. There are 4 dhams, or kingdoms of God, which represent the planets of the spiritual sky, which consists of the Brahma Jyoti and the Vaikunthas. These are Badarik Ashram, Rameshwara, Jagannath Puri, and Dwarka. Faithful Hindus still visit all these holy places for perfection of spiritual realization, following in the footsteps of devotees like Uddhav. And again the translation. There in Badarik Ashram, the personality of Godhead, in his incarnation as the sages Nara and Narayan, has been undergoing great penance since time immemorial for the welfare of all amiable living entities. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupah Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jigatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvishe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So today we've continued reading from this chapter, and we've heard this interesting description of various holy places in India. These 4 places, they're often referred to as the Char Dham, because, well, there's 4 dhams. And even today, they consist to be very, very popular. And we've heard that these are places which Hindus often attend to, which is an interesting discussion regarding the word Hindu within the context of Krishna consciousness. I remember just a few weeks ago, out of interest, I was going through Vedabase, and Krishna, I think it's Krishna Krsna Prabhu, he says Vedabase is both the greatest and worst thing to have happened to ISKCON. Because on the one hand, it's great because we have access to Srila Prabhupada's books and we can so easily find whatever we want, you know, when we go through. But it's the worst thing because whenever there's a disagreement between devotees, a devotee just types in the keyword that they want. They just copy and paste all of the sentences they can find that support their side of the thing, and then they just do this big bomb of sentences, which is, of course, not the way that we're meant to pass through Shastra and Srila Prabhupada's lectures and conversations and letters, so on and so forth. Because then, devoid of context, you can make any point, really. Especially with an acharya like Srila Prabhupada, who we've recorded so much of. Things can be taken out of context and so on and so forth. But still, just because it can be used negatively doesn't mean it can't be used at all. And it's also the best thing that's happened to ISKCON, not just the worst. It's both at the same time. So I was looking through and I looked up this word Hindu, and I specified it only to the actual verses. So not to any purports or any conversations, because I was curious where it comes up in Shastra. And of course, we don't find the word in Bhagavatam, but we do find the word in Chaitanya Charitamrita. But every time we find it in Chaitanya Charitamrita, we actually find it's in the context of Mahaprabhu or Mahaprabhu's associates talking to the Muslims. And it's mainly the Muslims who use the word Hindu, which, as we know, is the famous history of the word. It's all of those people past the Sindhu River. It's also where the word India comes from. The word India just comes from the Greek version of that, because the Greeks named that river the Indos, and then Indos eventually becomes, well, actually it's Hindos. I won't get into the technicalities of Greek, but in Greek they don't actually write the letter H. The letter H is like an apostrophe we have in English. So that's why you'll see often words that come from Greek, if they're similar to another word in Latin they'll write an NH, but in Greek they won't have an H, because it's just an apostrophe mark to say you breathe at the beginning of this word. It's just a little tangent. But so they wrote down the word Sindhu. They also made it the H, but then they just wrote it down as a little apostrophe. So when it got carried into English, then it became Indos, and then Indos eventually just became India. So yeah. So all of the words really that we commonly use then, you know, people say Hindustan, people say India. For this area, they all come from this river. And the best part is, now the best people to claim that name would actually be the Pakistanis. So the best Indians are actually Pakistanis, in the sense of that word. And the best Hindus then would be the Pakistanis. So that's, from that we can see what value the word Hindu has as a point of reference. But still, nevertheless, it is used. And the question of, at least, even if we can say this word Hindu is maybe a poor word to be used, we can still ask ourselves, Well, there is something that is being referred to as Hindu. There is something that is being called Hindu. So what is the value of that Hindu thing? And we'll find sort of different approaches, different responses. I don't think it's something we can objectively have an answer to. Different sadhus, according to their circumstances, will reply differently. His Holiness Bhakti-Vikas Swami sees very little value in it. I remember once he said, what is the point of identifying as a Hindu? All that Hinduism means today is that you worship Sai Baba. All that it means is that you worship a person as God who is in absolutely no way God. So what is the value of this word Hindu then? The average Hindu will know more about Sai Baba than they will about Krishna. Forget about Srila Prabhupada. So what is the value of that word Hindu then? Others will have the approach that Hindu in general can refer to the general Vedic culture as it is in its current situation, which is also a constructive way of using the word Hindu, because we do need to sort of delineate between culture and the actual practice of Krishna consciousness. Because, as we know, when Srila Prabhupada established Krishna consciousness in the West, when he established ISKCON, he didn't put such a prominent place on Vedic culture. Then, bit by bit, he introduced it more and more. So both extremes are negative. To completely deny Vedic culture is clearly against the trajectory that Srila Prabhupada established when establishing ISKCON. But also then to overemphasize it would imply that Srila Prabhupada was not bringing in essential when he was first establishing ISKCON. So both need to be there. So this word Hindu sometimes is used by devotees to denote this Vedic culture, this general culture which is there. So sometimes people will say the religion, or rather the cultural aspects, are those of the Hindus, but the actual spiritual aspects are those of Krishna consciousness. And that's also a very valid way of splicing it up. Personally, I don't like to say it that way, because current Hinduism is so far from ancient Vedic culture that the connections are barely even aesthetic at this point. Even the aesthetic points are mainly non-Vedic. If you see the standard Hindu wedding, it's as Muslim as it is Vedic. Furthermore, we know that the actual practical, forget about the aesthetic levels of the culture, the actual practical levels of the culture are fully gone. At least maybe there's a dhoti here or there, somewhere in India. But practically the values are completely gone. One disciple of Srila Prabhupada asked Srila Prabhupada, how did Krishna allow the Muslim empire, the Mughal empire, to invade India and desecrate so many temples? How did Krishna allow them to do such a terrible thing? And Srila Prabhupada, he responded by saying, actually, it's not even the fault of the Mughal empire. What do they know? They're just going around invading. That's their standard behavior. They had no extra knowledge. They were just behaving as they do. It is actually the fault of all of the Hindus at the time that the Mughal empire invaded, because they were already abandoning so much the Vedic aspects of the Hindu culture that Krishna said, well, now I'll release my protection. My protection is going away. What is the point? If you're not holding up your end of the bargain, so to speak, then I will remove the protection I've made for you all. So in that way, Srila Prabhupada almost seemed to categorize that invasion like a natural disaster or something. It was a natural disaster that happened. Why? Because again, this Hindu culture was already abandoning so much its Vedic grounding. So in that sense, we can say Hindu culture is not very much referring to that ancient Vedic culture, but it's referring to that corrupted form of Vedic culture we see today in India. But still, nevertheless, some things still apply, such as this going on pilgrimage. So we'll see some leftovers, some things carry over still. And some of those things are, again, this pilgrimage. And as I was saying at the beginning, these 4 dhams in particular are rather special. They're called the Char Dham. They're the 4 dhams, and they're a great place of pilgrimage. They're particularly interesting because each one of these actually correlates to the different yugas. So Badrak Ashram is specifically of the Char Dhams for Satya Yuga, because it's a place of meditation. It's a place where people go and meditate, and as we know, the Yuga Dharma in Satya Yuga is meditation. After that is Rameshwara, because that's where Ramchandra went and he prayed to Shiva. So, as we know, Ramchandra, he is incarnated in Treta Yuga. So, therefore, this dham is for Treta Yuga in particular. And then we have Dwarka, and we all have a good grasp of what happened in Dwarka, and that mainly happened in Dwapar Yuga. So then this is the next one. And then we have Jagannath Puri. And Jagannath Puri, as we know, Mahaprabhu said that Krishna, he comes in two forms, especially for Kali Yuga. He has the wooden form as Jagannath, and the liquid form as the Ganga. So Jagannath Puri also, this is specifically for Kali Yuga, because Jagannath, even though he is eternal, he has particularly come to give mercy unto the people of Kali Yuga, which is why we see Jagannath, he reciprocates with everyone. I was speaking with my roommate, Rohan Prabhu, about, we were talking about the dhams, and he was saying in particular, he enjoyed when you go to Jagannath Puri, he loved to see how everyone, no matter which type of person they were, everyone had some affection for Jagannath. We'll find all sorts of Vaishnav groups, all sorts of non-Vaishnav groups, all sorts of people have affection for Jagannath there. Because of course, in Kali Yuga, all sorts of ideas pop up. But Jagannath is so merciful, he allows them all to come into his worship. We'll find Buddhists are worshipping Jagannath, all sorts of upper sampradayas are worshipping Jagannath. Of course, genuine Vaishnavas are also worshipping Jagannath, and especially among the genuine sampradayas are the Gauriya Vaishnavas, all worshipping Jagannath. Even you'll find some Muslims who worship Jagannath in Jagannath Puri. So everyone is being called in to the worship of Jagannath. And therefore, Jagannath, he is there for Kali Yuga. So each one of these, they correlate to the different yugas in a specific way. Another interesting point, and a very interesting point for us, is Jagannath Puri in particular. Because while these other places are all very holy, and they come up often in Bhagavatam, especially Dwarka for us, because we are devotees of Krishna, or at least in my case, trying to be devotees of Krishna. But Jagannath Puri, even over Dwarka, takes a very specific point of interest. Because Jagannath Puri, as we know, was very much the dwelling place of Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu, after taking sannyas, he dwelled in Jagannath Puri for so long. And even though we are trying to worship Krishna, we are trying to understand Krishna, as Gauriya Vaishnavas, we do it through the lens of Mahaprabhu. So Mahaprabhu's choice to dwell in Jagannath Puri is a very significant choice for us as Gauriya Vaishnavas. And not just Mahaprabhu. It's famously said by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was asked, if you could take your residence in any dham, which dham would you take residence in? And people were, of course, expecting Radhakund or something rasik like this. And actually, Bhaktivinoda Thakur's answer is rather rasik. But he says, Kurukshetra. I would like to dwell in Kurukshetra, because we know this is the point where all the gopis were so disappointed at seeing Krishna. They were so disappointed that sweet Vrajanath Krishna was here as this Dwarkanath Krishna. And they were thinking, this is not the Krishna we know. We do not know a Krishna who carries a weapon by his side. We know a Krishna who carries a flute by his side. We do not know a Krishna who is dressed in majestic armor. We know a Krishna who is dressed in a simple yellow dhoti. So like this, they were so disappointed and so heartbroken. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, in order to render the service at their time of most need, therefore I would want to stay in Kurukshetra. So he expresses this desire. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur does not end up spending the rest of his pastimes in Kurukshetra. He ends up spending them in Jagannath Puri. Because all of the dhams are there in Jagannath Puri. And when the Ratha Yatra is being performed, there Kurukshetra is present. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, here we can see he's also doing the same. And Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur as well. Right now I'm failing to think of an example, but if you read the lifetime of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he established actually quite a few places in the area of Orissa around Jagannath Puri and within Jagannath Puri itself, saying this was maybe a place which Mahaprabhu visited, Actually, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he did a tour, and he placed the lotus feet, a form of the lotus feet of Mahaprabhu at certain locations. He figured out this was a place where Mahaprabhu went to while he was traveling, and he had them installed. That was one key thing that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur did. And so we can go, especially from the descriptions of the tour to South India, the areas in Orissa after Mahaprabhu left Jagannath Puri, you can see there's still temples today where Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur installed these lotus feet. And Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he also spent a lot of time in Orissa and in Jagannath Puri. He established lots of places which were considered to be non-different to Radhakund and all sorts of other very elevated dhams. So, it has a very, very significant point. But why, we can ask? Why not Dwarka? Why not Vrindavan? Why did Mahaprabhu choose to stay in Puri? And His Grace Madhavananda Prabhu, he did a very, very nectarian seminar on this topic. He was speaking about the glories of Jagannath Puri. And he was actually tying it in to the nature of these 4 dhams. Because all of these, except one, so 3 of these, are all present in Vrindavan. We can find Badrik Ashram. There's a place called Adi Badri or something like that. And it's considered to be non-different to Badrik Ashram. And it's in Vrindavan. In fact, some people, some in the local traditions say it's actually the spiritual source of Badrik Ashram. Rameshwar and Dwarka, they also can be found. In Vrindavan, we can find their non-different manifestations. But Jagannath Puri we cannot find in Vrindavan. Jagannath Puri is not present in Vrindavan. In fact, not only is it not present, but Jagannath Puri, it's said to be the other way around. That Jagannath Puri itself is a manifestation of Vrindavan, but a very particular manifestation of Vrindavan. Gupta Vrindavan, sometimes Jagannath Puri is called, the hidden Vrindavan. And this ties further into it. So His Grace Madhavananda Prabhu was making the point that we know the whole point of Mahaprabhu's Leela is Mahaprabhu wants to forget he's Krishna, which is why there's this Apasampradaya, these Sahajiyas, they're called a Gaur Nagar Bhav. They believe in cultivating quote-unquote Gaur Nagar Bhav, the Gaur Nagaris. And they have this idea, Gauranga Mahaprabhu, he is like Krishna, and therefore we are meditating and we are having forms like gopis, but we are having a romantic love for Mahaprabhu. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur in particular completely smashed these individuals. He had a very, very strong dislike for their philosophy, as do all our acharyas. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur did a good job of driving them away. Because this is complete rasabhas. It is complete offense, actually. Gaur Govinda Maharaj would say this is torture to the lotus feet of Mahaprabhu. Because Mahaprabhu, he is trying to forget he is Krishna. He is trying to experience the mood of being a devotee. And these people, in their flamboyant mental speculation, they're trying to force the very opposite of Mahaprabhu's whole reason for Advent onto Mahaprabhu. So Gaur Govinda Maharaj, he would say this is torture. And all of our acharyas, especially Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who was very invested in smashing out the upper sampradayas, as was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, they've completely condemned these people. But by an understanding the condemnation of this false philosophy, it can help us understand more why Jagannath Puri. Because Jagannath Puri is not present in Vrindavan. But Krishna is. Krishna is always present in Vrindavan. And Krishna was present at the time of Mahaprabhu in Vrindavan only 4,500 years earlier. So, it is not that Mahaprabhu is any separate individual than Krishna. It is not that Mahaprabhu, Gaur Leela, is any separate Leela than Krishna Leela. Gaur Leela and Krishna Leela, they are one and the same. So, when Mahaprabhu goes to Vrindavan, even though he enjoys, he is caught up constantly in remembering he is Krishna. It is not that one can so easily forget, especially the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is not too faulty with his memory. It is not that one can so easily forget all of the pastimes that were had. So if Mahaprabhu was to go to Vraj, to go to Vrindavan, as he does, we know he doesn't stay in Vrindavan. He visits and then he comes back to Puri. Even though he was so eager to go to Vrindavan. The whole time in his pastimes, we know Mahaprabhu's associates, they come up with so many wonderful and beautiful plans in order to prevent Mahaprabhu from escaping Jagannath Puri. Eventually, they feel bad. And then they say, okay, we'll let Mahaprabhu go. But then Mahaprabhu returns. We can give so many reasons, but at the end of the day, Mahaprabhu, for all that we can say about him, is still the personality of Godhead, still the supreme personality of Godhead, and he is in control of all factors. It was only his desire to return to Jagannath Puri. And that's again, because in Vrindavan, there's too much memory. I'm Krishna, I'm Krishna. That identification with Krishna is too strong. And in all of these, and that is why all of these other places, they are present in Vrindavan. But Jagannath Puri is not. And therefore, there was no direct experience of Jagannath Puri as Krishna. At least Krishna in that form, in that original form. So when Mahaprabhu goes back to Jagannath Puri, there he is in Gupta Vrindavan, hidden Vrindavan. It is Vrindavan, but it is hidden. It is in a concealed form. And therefore, Mahaprabhu is able to kind of forget the Vrindavan-like nature of this place. There's further descriptions given by His Holiness Gaur Govinda Maharaj. They get incredibly more rasic. I had to tap out a few reasons later on. It was a bit too rasic for me as to why Jagannath Puri was chosen. But another reason why, and is that we can consider Vrindavan and Puri's relationship. We know Sachi Mata, when she was trying to convince Mahaprabhu, please stay somewhere nearby. She says, don't go to Vrindavan, go to Jagannath Puri. They are like the two rooms of the same house. His Holiness Gaur Govinda Maharaj says this is very true. But Vrindavan and Puri in particular have a very special relationship. They're the two different banks of the same river. There's the river of love for Godhead. There's the river of love for Krishna. And there are the two embankments. There's the embankment of union, where Krishna is there with his devotees, and that is Vrindavan. And then there's the embankment of separation. And this embankment is Jagannath Puri. So this is the embankment of Puri. So in this way, separation is constantly there. That's why we hear sometimes Jagannath Puri is called Vipralamba Kshetra. So it is like this. In this way, Mahaprabhu, he's able, in one way, to be separate from his identity as Krishna. And that's also why Mahaprabhu loves so much this form. One of the reasons why he loves the form Jagannath. Because Jagannath, absolutely Krishna himself, but also Krishna in a slightly harder to recognize way. So we hear all of these things. And this is why Jagannath Puri holds such a high esteem for Mahaprabhu. And if it holds such a high esteem for Mahaprabhu, then obviously it holds such a high esteem for us, even higher than Dwarka in many ways. Even though Dwarka is identified with Jagannath Puri, we know that Navadvip is said to be like the Vrindavan in many ways of Gaur Leela. Often it's said that Jagannath Puri is the Dwarka of Gaur Leela. And we find lots of similarities. We know everyone in Navadvip was so sad when Mahaprabhu left Navadvip, in the same way that everyone in Vrindavan was so sad when Krishna left. It's said that Keshava Bharati is a Krura in Gaur Leela, because he's the one who takes Mahaprabhu away. He's the one who takes him out of Vrindavan, of Navadvip, and takes him to Dwarka or Jagannath Puri. So in this way, actually, Jagannath Puri is identified as Dwarka. But in another way, it is much higher than Dwarka. Because, of course, as we know, and we won't get into the details, but Mahaprabhu manifested stuff that was much more higher than the Dwarka mood in Jagannath Puri. So Jagannath Puri is also higher than Dwarka. Even though it is Dwarka, in that sense, it is also higher. That being said, it does have some relationship with Dwarka. We know in Dwarka there is Madhurya, but there's also Aishvarya. In Vrindavan there's also heaps of Aishvarya. There's more Aishvarya in Vrindavan than there is in Dwarka. But there's so much Madhurya that you can't even see the Aishvarya anymore. There's so much sweetness, you can't even see the opulence anymore. Often the example is being given of medicine. In Dwarka, you have the medicine and then you have a bit of sugar to ease the taste of the medicine. In Vrindavan, there's even more medicine, but there's so much sugar that you don't even realize you had the medicine at all. This is the description that's given. And we can say the same about Jagannath Puri. Jagannath Puri is also like Dwarka. There is a lot of Aishwarya, and there's a lot of Madhurya. Which is why, just take a look at the name. Jagannath is not a very intimate name. Jagannath, the king of the Lord of the universe, the Nath of Jagat. This is very much a name rooted in opulence. And we find that also in a lot of the people who worship Jagannath. Jagannath is worshipped very opulently. Sometimes he's identified as Narasimha Dev, other times as Narayan. All of these opulent titles are given. But again, this is given in a way that Mahaprabhu can sort of run away from the Krishna, sweet Krishna conception. There's also further points that are given. Gaur Govinda Maharaj, he says that in Jagannath Puri, this relationship between the Aishwarya and the Madhurya, it's one of competition. It's the same as in Vrindavan, actually, because sometimes we do find Aishwarya come out in Vrindavan. When Krishna was dancing on the heads of Kaliya, we know that some of the devotees, they were rushing forth. They were not when he was dancing. Before he was dancing, when he was being held, some of the devotees, they were rushing forth thinking, Krishna will die. No, Krishna will pass away. Krishna will not be able to survive this. They're there in that very sweet, intimate mood. And other devotees, they were there, they were stopping, they were holding them back. They were saying, no, it's all right, I think Krishna can handle this. And they were there in that mood of Aishwarya, because they realized the opulence of Krishna. And so Balaram and a few others, they were there stopping them. But when they stopped those devotees, it's not that those devotees said, oh, okay, fair enough. And then they sat down and waited for Krishna to win. They didn't do that at all. They were more eager. They were saying, why are you holding me? Let me go and save Krishna. They were saying like this. Jagannath Puri is also in that mood, we can say. But it's constantly in that mood. There is that Aishwarya there, but it is almost intensifying the Madhurya for those devotees who are in Madhurya there. Because if we were to say it's purely Aishwarya, it might become difficult, so to speak, for that Madhurya sort of sweetness in all sorts of rasas to manifest. So we find all of these things in Jagannath Puri. So while all these dhams are worshipable, absolutely worshipable, for Gauriya Vaishnavas, Jagannath Puri holds a very special place in our heart. And today is the appearance day of Gadadhar Pandit. And Gadadhar Pandit, he also plays a very central role, actually, to Puri Leela. Often we find of the Panchatattva, I find everyone knows a lot, lots of people know about all of the Panchatattva, but everyone always focuses on Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, obviously, Nityananda Prabhu, also obviously, and Advaita Acharya. Lots of attention is given to these three personalities. But Gadadhar Pandit, in many ways, is as important as all of these. And so is Srivas. But Gadadhar Pandit, he is very particularly important. And we know Gadadhar Pandit, he has a very intimate relationship with Mahaprabhu. Intimate in a mood of friendship almost. They're around the similar age. The rest of the Panchatattva is much older. But Gadadhar Pandit, I think he's maybe a year younger than Mahaprabhu. Something around in that ballpark. And they were both in the same Varna. They were both Brahmins. They both grew up in the same sort of area. And they both had similar interests. So Mahaprabhu and Gadadhar Pandit, they were very good friends growing up. And growing up like this, they had a very special friendship. They would trade in points of nyaya. Sometimes Mahaprabhu, he would go around challenging people in debates of nyaya. And everyone would be scared. What would happen is either the other nyaya scholars would be scared. They'd think, not Vishvambar, not Nimai Pandit. It's going to be the end of our careers if we debate him. So they always have a convenient excuse. And the devotees in Navadvip, they also would avoid debating him, because they would say, hey, what's the point of Nyaya? I don't care about logic. I just want to think about Krishna. Stop making me think about all these boring logical rules, right? So everyone would avoid him, except for Gadadhar Pandit. But Gadadhar Pandit, he would use Nyaya to make devotional conclusions. He would say, a lot of these followers of Nyaya, they have a very impersonalist understanding. And then using the logical rules, he would say, but actually we should understand that the Supreme Personality of Godhead must be a person. So like this Gadadhar Pandit, he would entertain Mahaprabhu. Also at times, this is a very famous pastime, Mahaprabhu, he would start going a little mad. He would start going mad and he would cry out and he would say, where is Krishna? Where is Krishna? And no one would really know what to do. It's said he would become so upset that we know the Ganga flows from the feet of the Supreme Person, but it's described by Vrindavan Das Thakur that it's like it moved from his feet to his eyes. That's how many tears are coming out. It's like the Ganga decided to come from a different source, and it was coming from his eyes instead. So many tears, and he was so upset, and no one knew what to do. No one knew what to do. People would try to console Mahaprabhu, and they would get something done, but it wouldn't really satisfy him. And if they were to ask him any question, he would just respond with Krishna Katha. They would say, what's going on? What's going on, Nimai Pandit? What's happening? And Mahaprabhu, he would just say, Krishna, he is running around playing with the gopas. These would be his responses. And no one had any idea what's going on. But then one day, Gadadhar Pandit, he was there. And he was walking around as this was happening. And Mahaprabhu, he was there, completely upset, completely just frustrated. And it's described at this point, before people would try, now people just gave up. They had no idea. No one was engaging. But Gadadhar Pandit, he says, Krishna is always eternally in your heart. And then Mahaprabhu, hearing this, he thinks, at the very time it's described, he hears Hridoy, which means heart in Bengali. At the very moment he hears this word, he starts trying to crawl and claw at his heart, thinking, now I'll find Krishna, now I'll find Krishna. And Gadadhar Pandit, seeing this, he instantly grabs the hands of Mahaprabhu. And he says, be patient, Krishna will come. Krishna will arrive at one point. And Sachi Mata, she saw this, and she went up to Gadadhar Pandit and she said, you're a very intelligent boy. No one else knew both how to appease my son and also how to stop his madness. So please follow him wherever you go for the rest of your life. Please follow this, my son who gets into so much trouble. Please follow him. And we know this continued. Then after Mahaprabhu took sannyas, Gadadhar Pandit also took Kshetra sannyas to reside in Jagannath Puri. Because he assumed, naturally, if Mahaprabhu he is taking sannyas in Puri, I will stay with him. I will follow him like a shadow. And we can see this. He followed him like a shadow. The moment they were the same age, they had the same profession. When Mahaprabhu left Navadvip to go to Jagannath Puri, Gadadhar Pandit also took Kshetra sannyas. And taking it there, he was under the very valid assumption that Mahaprabhu will stay there forever. And so he took the vow to worship Gopinath there for the rest of his life. But then Mahaprabhu did a bit of a switcheroo on Gadadhar Pandit, and Mahaprabhu went off to Vrindavan, as we mentioned earlier. And he told lots of devotees to go away, but he took some devotees with him. And one of those people who he told to stay back, but who very much wanted to be the devotees to go with him, was Gadadhar Pandit. And Gadadhar Pandit, he went up to Mahaprabhu, we know, so famously, he went up to Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu said, what are you doing here? Go back, you've taken Kshetra sannyas, how can you follow me? Gadadhar Pandit, he says, to hell with my Kshetra sannyas. Wherever you are, that is Jagannath Puri. If I cannot follow you, then I will do away with this. Of course, this is the very elevated interactions of Mahaprabhu's associates. These are people on the highest platform. But we can see here that very basic principle, that the essence overrules any consideration. We can consider such personalities to be beyond even their vows. But of course, that is not for us to emulate. One has to be on the platform of fully tasting that essence before one can very strategically maneuver. It's a very fine line between neglecting the essence and neglecting a detail in order to serve the essence. So one has to be on the highest platform before one can do such things. But when one is on the highest platform, we see all those acharyas in our line. They've done all of these things on the highest, all of these sort of maneuvers. I always find my favorite example is Gaur Kishore Das Babaji telling Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur never to go to Kolkata because it is hell on earth. But what does Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur do? He founds the Gauriya Math in Kolkata. This is not for devotees who aren't on that highest platform to do, because Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was able to fully understand the essence of Gaur Kishore Das Babaji's instruction and fully understand the heart of his instruction. And of course he realized the most pleasing thing to do in service for Gaur Kishore Das Babaji would be to establish the Gauriya Math, to preach this glorious mission of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And the best way to do so would be to do so in Kolkata. This would be the most effective way to do so. But again, this is for personalities like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. A lesser example that I always like is Bhaktivinoda Thakur didn't like the harmonium at all. He actually spoke out against the harmonium a lot. He just didn't like he really, really didn't like it. If you hear what he said, it wasn't very positive. And yet we know Srila Prabhupada so gloriously. Who has played the harmonium better than Srila Prabhupada? Because Srila Prabhupada playing the harmonium has established Krishna consciousness all around the world. But again, such points are for those on the highest platform who can really discriminate such points. So he says, to hell with my so-called Kshetra Sannyas. Prabhupada writes in his purport that Kshetra Sannyas is actually the ideal form for Vanaprastha life. But yes, so then he says that. And then Mahaprabhu says, well then, if we can go past your Kshetra Sannyas, also you've taken this vow to serve Gopinath for the rest of your life. And then he says, Gadadhar Pandit, he says, just by seeing your lotus feet, I've performed 1,000,000 services for Gopinath. And then Mahaprabhu, he says, look, you can almost, when you read it in Chaitanya Charitamrita, you can almost feel the frustration from Mahaprabhu. You can feel like he's saying, look, I've had enough of this. If you break these two vows, how much sin is going to go on my head? And then Gadadhar Pandit says, that's all right, I won't do it for you. Actually, I'm not so interested in you. I'm just going to do it on my own. Just out of my own desire, I'm going to visit Sachi Mata and then go to Vrindavan. Just out of my own desire. Actually, Mahaprabhu has nothing to do with you. So then he goes off on his own. And Mahaprabhu, they go off separately. And then at Katak, they all meet. They meet again. And this time, Mahaprabhu, he's very, very serious. Mahaprabhu, he is very, very serious. And he speaks so heavily. And he tells him, you must go. You must return. And then, as he does so, we know that, Gadadhar Pandit, he passes out. Because Mahaprabhu says, the only way you can please me is by returning. And Gadadhar Pandit, he passes out, and Mahaprabhu gets on a boat and goes away. And then Gadadhar Pandit's there, and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya is left to nurse him back. And then he says, this is the nature of Krishna Leela. Forget about sending his devotee. It is not that Mahaprabhu doesn't have affection for you. Forget about sending his devotee away. Krishna is willing to break his own vow in order to keep the vow of his devotee. And he brings, of course, the famous example of Bhishma. Krishna carrying a weapon in order to, breaking his own promise in order to keep the promise of Bhishma. And he says, this is the nature of Krishna Leela. You just sort of have to accept it. This is how it is. And it's actually glorious because of this. We should think how much pain Mahaprabhu is in to let go of one of his most beloved associates. And yet, he happily does so in order to keep the vow, in order to keep the promise of Gadadhar Pandit. So why is this so? Won't get into it too much because again it can get too rasic. But still, some tattvas we can have about the nature of Gadadhar Pandit. Pastimes are maybe a bit much. But there's still some tattvas about why Gadadhar Pandit plays this role. It's sometimes said that actually of all the associates of Mahaprabhu, no one loved Mahaprabhu more than Gadadhar Pandit. It's often said like this. And we know the identity of Gadadhar Pandit. The identity of Gadadhar Pandit is Srimati Radharani. We don't find this in Chaitanya Charitamrita. We find it in the purports, but we don't find it in the texts. Gadadhar Pandit is identified as a Shakti, but he's never directly identified as Radharani. And actually, the earliest maybe reference we can find of Gadadhar Pandit being Srimati Radharani is in Kavi Karnapur's famous Gorganadesha Deepika, where he identifies Gadadhar Pandit as Srimati Radharani and as Lalita. He identifies him as both. But nevertheless, we do accept this. And I like this point because I think it very much stresses the point. Sometimes people will say, 6 Goswamis, I'm going to read all of the 6 Goswamis and I'm going to read all of these early texts, and then I'm going to come straight to the source of it all, right? Sometimes we'll hear people say like this. Or people will just say, without reading Prabhupada's books, I still remember I was once talking to this devotee, this fresh devotee. I think he was telling me he joined ISKCON maybe 6 months earlier. He was telling me about Brihad Bhagavatamrita, and he was quoting all of these other books, like all of these all of these Goswami books. And I remember as he was telling me, at least 3 or 4 like severe apasiddhantas he was just churning out, like real complete misconceptions about the philosophy. I still remember he was churning them out, and I thought that reflected the fact that we understand these things through the lens of the parampara, through the tradition. We can understand the Gadadhar Pandit as Srimati Radharani. Why? Because our acharyas have told us so. The tradition is pouring out all of these details. All of this knowledge is being poured out, and we must have this knowledge in order to understand these things appropriately. It's not that we can just jump in to all of these other texts. Only through the lens of Srila Prabhupada can we understand all of these other things. So I find this one point. Of course, there's countless points. There's countless points that can be done to reinforce this idea. But this is one such example. So then, Gadadhar Pandit. We know there's that famous bhajan by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur called Kali Kukur Vadan, I think. And it describes Mahaprabhu. But it describes Mahaprabhu entirely in terms of all of his titles. So it begins Kali Yuga Pavana, like that it begins. The savior of Kali Yuga. And then we hear his descriptions in relation to his pastimes. It never will give a direct name of Mahaprabhu. He gives names of Mahaprabhu in relation to his associates, in relation to all of the dhams he goes through, like this. And when it comes to Gadadhar Pandit, it says Gadadhar Madan, that personality who maddens Gadadhar, who makes Gadadhar Pandit go mad. So this is the identification, the relationship that is given between Mahaprabhu and Gadadhar Pandit. But there is a bit of a question that can be asked in relation to this point, and also to the point of Gadadhar Pandit being Srimati Radharani. Because normally, when we say, who is Krishna in Gaur Leela, we know it is Gauranga. And then if we say, who is Srimati Radharani in Gaur Leela, we say it is Gauranga. So, what then is Gadadhar Pandit doing? What is Gadadhar Pandit doing here? And we also know Gadadhar Pandit at times, he doesn't seem like Srimati Radharani. As we heard by Kavi Karnapur, he identifies him also with Lalita. We also know in Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's described Gadadhar Pandit, because in the sense of Narayan, we have Vishnupriya as the Shakti, so to speak, of Mahaprabhu. But in the sense of Krishna, is actually Gadadhar. But we hear that this relationship was expressed more in the mood of Rukmini. Krishna's Kaviraj Thakur, he says, it's like Rukmini Devir Joiche. It's similar to the mood of Rukmini. It's dasya, but it's done in a timid way, like in the mood of Rukmini. So then what is happening here? What is happening with Srimati Radharani as Gadadhar Pandit? Because we're finding is not very much like the mood of Srimati Radharani. Often there's these other sort of mentions. And we know Srimati Radharani is generally relatively bold, but Gadadhar Pandit is timid and quiet the whole time. Actually, Gadadhar Pandit is there very necessarily and very elevated, because Gadadhar Pandit is the personality of Srimati Radharani, but giving that mood, giving that bhava to Mahaprabhu. So Gadadhar Pandit is present there by giving this devotion, which is why we know so famously Gadadhar Pandit is giving Bhagavatam class to Mahaprabhu every morning. He's doing this in order to give that mood, which is why this other mood seems to come up, like Rukmini, like Lalita, all of these, because actually the main mood is being given to Mahaprabhu. What is left, maybe a weakened, we can say, but we shouldn't say weakened in a lesser form. Gadadhar Pandit is as worshipable as Srimati Radharani, but in a weakened form, it is coming out in this more timid form, because the central bhava is being given to Mahaprabhu. Which is why Gaur Gadadhar, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he established, he was a very dear devotee actually of the form of Gaur Gadadhar. Srila Prabhupada, of course these are differences in mood, not of tattva, not that it's a different sampradaya, but Srila Prabhupada loved Gaur Nitai, because of course preaching is the heart of Srila Prabhupada, and who manifests preaching more than Nityananda Prabhu. So Gaur Nitai very much represented that mood of Srila Prabhupada, which is why we mainly worship as followers of Srila Prabhupada, Gaur Nitai. But Gaur Gadadhar worship we also see. And we see that in Bhaktivinoda Thakur's house. If we go in Parikrama and you visit his dwelling in Navadvip, you'll see there's Gaur Gadadhar there. So Gaur Gadadhar, actually together, they are a very central concept. Because Gadadhar Pandit is giving this, which is why Gadadhar Pandit is constantly following Krishna. Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Constantly following in order to guide and to give these moods. That's why it becomes weaker and weaker. And the further we go into CC, the less Gadadhar Pandit becomes prominent. Because the more and more Mahaprabhu is fully identifying as Radharani, as we know at the end. Srimati Radharani, the more and more it goes on, that's why it becomes very elevated, because more and more Mahaprabhu is identifying with Srimati Radharani, and therefore Gadadhar Pandit is less and less present in the pastimes, because more and more of Gadadhar Pandit, so to speak, is being channeled by Mahaprabhu. In the same way that Mahaprabhu couldn't go to Vrindavan because it would remind him of Vraj, with Gadadhar Pandit there, it would sort of take away, because Gadadhar Pandit would still have to play that mood of Radharani. So the more and more he goes away in the background, the more and more it's a giving of that mood to Mahaprabhu. So this is that position. So we can see Gadadhar Pandit, even though not so much attention is given to Gadadhar Pandit, actually Gadadhar Pandit is so central to Mahaprabhu Leela. And Mahaprabhu Leela is so central to everything. But sometimes, and I'll finish on this point, sometimes people can say, well, it seems like then Gadadhar Pandit is lesser. Because Gadadhar Pandit is being emptied of that mood. Gadadhar Pandit is donating that mood. Or we could say Krishna is stealing that mood. Mahaprabhu, we can say, stealing the mood from Gadadhar Pandit. So people might say, well, it's like it's being reduced. But actually, it's far from that. Gadadhar Pandit becomes more glorified by doing this. For two reasons. One, because of willingly giving up this mood. It is, we know, the one desire left of Krishna is to experience being a devotee, experience being the greatest devotee. And Gadadhar Pandit is the greatest devotee. By giving this mood, we know dharma samsiddhir haritoshanam. To please the Supreme Lord is the fulfillment of all dharmas, of anything that is great, to satisfy the Supreme Lord. This is the greatest act one can do. And so Gadadhar Pandit, by giving this, this is an act of seva to Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And therefore, because of this such elevated seva, such a great seva, we can say Gadadhar Pandit is so worshipable. Because actually emptying of the mood is there, but the service is there as well. And the perfection of service is the perfection of spiritual life. So therefore, by performing such a great service, Gadadhar Pandit becomes even greater, because this is service to the Supreme Lord. And furthermore, the other reason why is because Gadadhar Pandit, by lacking this, we know that Nanda Maharaj, before Krishna advented, it's described that Nanda Maharaj would feel depressed, because he would feel there's a hole in my heart. There's a hole in my heart that's roughly the shape of, a middle-sized boy who plays the flute and likes to dance around. There's this sort of shaped hole in my heart. And with that, he longed for it all the time. And there's a whole pastime given about this, right? So, lacking either the object of worship or even that mood of worship, such great devotees, they feel empty. And with that emptiness, Gadadhar Pandit longed constantly to attain Krishna Prem. Obviously, Gadadhar Pandit did have Krishna Prem, but to attain it in its fullest, in Gadadhar Pandit's fullness. So, Gadadhar Pandit, almost more than anyone else, had so much greed to serve Krishna. So much greed to have the high moods. So much greed just to taste more and more Krishna Prem. Because Mahaprabhu, he's so generous. Everywhere he goes, like a volcano erupting. Just Krishna Prem here or there. Normally it's so difficult. But Mahaprabhu, just by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Just like this, Mahaprabhu is distributing it everywhere. And Gadadhar Pandit is there, following every step. As this Sankirtan is going on, I can restore some of that. So that hunger for bhakti is the strongest in Gadadhar Pandit. Because Gadadhar Pandit is trying to bring it back to himself. Gadadhar Pandit is trying to satisfy that which he has given away. He's trying to restore it. And as we know, that hunger, that is the only qualification for bhakti. We hear in Chaitanya Charitamrita. The only qualification, it is not by millions and millions of births of good activities that one becomes qualified. It is only by that sincere desire. As we know, naturally that sincere desire correlates to sincere lack of desire for material things. It's not, as the Sahajiyas interpret it, because I really want it today, I can do all of these high elevated things. Not as the Sahajiyas interpret it at all. It's because if there's a natural desire, then a desire for all of these material perversions will go away. Of course, Sahajiyas are just messing everything up. But so Gadadhar Pandit, with that strong desire, he's there. With that strong desire, he's following through. And therefore, Gadadhar Pandit is such a great devotee. Because in that lack of that mood, in that hunger to have his mood restored, so to speak, although he's willingly giving it, he also wants it back. There's that push and pull. Just because you give a meal away doesn't mean you're not hungry, right? Even if you happily give it away. So in this mood, Gadadhar Pandit is following constantly, and therefore he is in such an elevated position. And that's one reason why he follows. And the other reason why he follows is also he's Srimati Radharani, as we know. He's guiding Mahaprabhu, saying, this is how you do it. This is why we know in that pastime, Mahaprabhu is trying to claw his own heart out in order to see. And Gadadhar Pandit says, no, don't do this. He's guiding Mahaprabhu not to do anything extreme. And again, this is why he's giving Bhagavatam class every morning to Mahaprabhu. So from here we can understand, in Jagannath Puri, residing with Mahaprabhu is Gadadhar Pandit. So Jagannath Puri is so elevated, and it is a push and pull. It is a not a double-edged sword. It's a symbiotic relationship. Jagannath Puri is resided in by the great devotees and by the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself, because it is so great. And it is also so great because it is recited in by so many great personalities. And it's the wonderful nature of the Dham, which was so perfectly illustrated by Gadadhar Pandit when he said, wherever you are, Mahaprabhu, there it is the exact same as Jagannath Puri. So there we find the wonderful nature of the Dham and the wonderful nature of its devotees. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki. I don't know how to